Hello everybody, welcome to Tactic Techniques. Interview questions and answers for Docker. What is Docker? Docker is an open-source lightweight containerization technology. It has gained widespread popularity in the cloud and application packaging world. It allows you to automate the deployment of applications in lightweight and portable containers. Most notable features of Docker is application agility, developer productivity, easy modeling, operational efficiencies, placement. Docker containers lifecycles are mentioned below. Create container, run container, pause container, unpause container, start container, stop container, restart container, kill container, destroy container.
Does Docker support IPv6? Yes, Docker does support IPv6. However, IPv6 networking is only supported on Docker daemons running on Linux hosts. Support for IPv6 address has been there since Docker Engine 1.5 release. How do you find stored Docker volumes? Use the command /var/lib/docker/volumes.
Most commonly used instructions in Dockerfile. From. This is used to set the base image for upcoming instructions. A Docker file is considered to be valid if it starts with the from instruction. Label. This is used for the image organization based on projects, modules, or licensing. It also helps in automation as we specify a key value pair while defining a label that can be later accessed and handled programmatically. Run. This command is used to execute instructions following it on the top of the current image in a new layer. Note that with each run command execution, we add layers on top of the image and then use that in subsequent steps. CMD. This command is used to provide default values of an executing container. In cases of multiple CMD commands, the last instruction would be difference between CMD and entry point. CMD command provides executable defaults for an executing container. In case the executable has to be omitted, then the usage of entry point instruction along with the JSON array format has to be incorporated. Entry point specifies that the instruction within it will always be run when the container starts. This command provides an option to configure the parameters and the executables. If the Docker file does not have this command, then it would still get inherited from the base image mentioned in the from instruction. The most commonly used entry point is /bin/sh or /bin/bash for most of the base images. What are the three components of Docker architecture? Client, Docker host, registry. What is the default IP address of the Docker host? 192.168.99.100. What command is used for remove all stocked containers, unused networks and dangling images? Docker system prune. What are Docker namespaces? When a container is run, Docker creates a set of isolated workspaces for the container called namespace. What platforms can you run Docker on? Arch Linux, CentOS 6 Plus, Crux 3.0 Plus, Fedora 1920 Plus, Gentoo, OpenSUSE 12.3 Plus, Perl 6.5 Plus, Ubuntu 12.04, 13.04, Windows. Docker can also run on the following cloud-based platforms: Amazon EC2, Amazon ECS, Google Compute Engine, Microsoft Azure, Rackspace. What is Docker Hub? Docker Hub is a cloud-based registry which helps you to link to code repositories. It allows you to build, test, store your image in Docker Cloud. What is Docker Swarm? Docker Swarm is a native tool used for clustering and scheduling Docker containers. Docker CP copies a file from a Docker container to a local system. Syntax: Docker CP, source_path, dest_path. Namespace types supported by Docker is PID, mount, IPC, user, network. Docker exec, access the container and run commands inside that container. Docker info gets detailed information about Docker installed on the system, like the number of containers, images, running, paused, stopped, server version, volume, runtimes, kernel version, total memory. How does communication happen between Docker client and Docker daemon? The communication between Docker client and Docker daemon happens with the help of the combination of TCP, REST API, and socket.io. What are Docker object labels? Docker object labels help us add metadata to Docker objects, including containers, images, swarm nodes, network, volumes, and services. What is Docker daemon? Docker daemon is a service that manages Docker containers, images, storage volumes, and the network. It constantly listens to Docker API requests and processes them. A daemon can communicate with other daemons as well for the management of Docker services. Docker has a few drawbacks as listed below. No storage option. Poor monitoring. What is Docker Compose? Docker Compose defines and runs multi-container Docker applications. With Compose, a YAML file is used to configure an application's services. All the services from the configuration can be created and started with a single command. What is a Docker image? A Docker image helps in creating Docker containers. We can create the Docker image with the build command. What is a Dockerfile? Docker builds images automatically by reading the instructions from a Dockerfile, a text file that contains all commands, in order, needed to build a given image. A Docker image consists of read-only layers, each of which represents a Dockerfile instruction. The layers are stacked and each one is a delta of the changes from the previous layer. What is a Docker container? Docker containers include the application and all of its dependencies. It shares the kernel with other containers, running as isolated processes in user space on the host operating system. Docker containers are not tied to any specific infrastructure, they run on any computer, on any infrastructure, and in any cloud. It is basically runtime instances of Docker images. What is hypervisor? A hypervisor is a software that makes virtualization possible. It is also called virtual machine monitor. It divides the host system and allocates the resources to each divided virtual environment. You can basically have multiple OS on a single host system. What is a template used for describing a build of an image? Dockerfile. Docker is written in which programming language? Docker is written in Golang. Can a container restart by itself? Yes, it is possible only while using certain Docker-defined policies while using the Docker run command. Following are the available policies: off, on failure, unless stopped, always. What is the purpose of Docker_host? It contains container, images, and Docker daemon. What is the difference between Dockerfile and Docker Compose? A Dockerfile is a simple text file that contains the commands a user could call to assemble an image, whereas Docker Compose is a tool for defining and running multi-container Docker applications. Docker Compose define the services that make up your app in Docker Compose.yml so they can be run together in an isolated environment. How is Docker monitored in production? To monitor Docker in production, tools such as Docker Stats and Docker Events are available. Through these tools, one can get reports on important statistics. Once Docker Stats are called with a container ID, it returns the container CPU and memory usage. It is similar to the top command in Linux. What is a Docker ignore file? Docker ignore files, which allows you to mention a list of files and/or directories which you might want to ignore while building the image. What is the Docker engine? Docker engine is an application which has client-server type architecture with these major components: daemon process, REST API, CLI. Docker architecture. It is based on client-server architecture. Docker client talks to Docker daemon, a long-running program, via REST API over a network interface or Unix sockets. Docker client and daemon can run on the same system or remote. Docker daemon is responsible for building, running and distributing the containers. It contains Docker daemon, Docker client, Docker registries, Docker objects. What are the common Docker objects? Docker you use many things like images, containers, registries, services, volumes, etc. Can I use JSON instead of YAML for my Compose file in Docker? Yes, you can very comfortably use JSON instead of the default YAML for your Docker Compose file. How can one see the logs of a container in real time? Docker logs follow container ID. How can you terminate a detached container? We can terminate a detached container using two ways. First, we can kill it using the docker kill command. Second, we can stop it using the docker stop command. The docker kill command stops the container immediately by using the kill signal. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe my channel.